are live. Welcome back, Haley. Thank you so much for your generous time in a follow-up to our last video that we did last year, actually around this time. So for all of the viewers out there, in all honesty, this is less of an interview and more you guys just dropping on me and Haley catching up about various things, but more specifically around winter tulips. What was different this year? Because you're going to learn that Haley predominantly sells wholesale and started a CSA subscription this winter season. We're going to talk about Valentine's Day, what it's like to hit a major flower holiday, teeing that up with florists, getting pre-orders. Haley was just a beast in doing that. So we're going to cover all that and more. But before we do that, Haley, do you want to give everyone an intro as to who you are, where you're growing, and some background about you and your mom?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Jesse, and just glad to catch up, right? Okay, so I'm Haley. I am 30-ish years old. I turned 30 last year. I am located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles north of the city, in Butler County, for anyone who's in the know. This is our third year of growing, but lifetime, I have spent basically my entire life in the plant world. Both of my parents are Penn State horticulturists trained, and they have operated a landscape construction company since I was born. Our property that our farm is on is actually old nursery property, so old tree farm. And I have been in that world my entire life. So I have fond memories of being in the greenhouses and going through all the nurseries. And I currently actually work in the the landscape business, nursery business, with my mom and my dad as basically their assistant. I'm a project coordinator, project manager. So I have the plant background as well as the small business background, because, it's a small business. $5 million in sales, $6 million in sales every year. And I'm, very fortunate that I'm up close and personal with the numbers and how operations work. So I come with a business and a plant background to flower farming. My mom and I decided that in, I think 2021 at this point, that we wanted to start a flower farm. Our job is very busy, right? Like it's seasonal, the same seasons as the flower farm typically is. So we were like, we're gonna do wholesale only. And it happened that Cooperative or co-op was opening the same year that we started going, getting operating. And that was just a perfect marriage, and it's been great. So we're going on year 3 here and with the Cooperative, and this is year 2 of doing tulips.
Yeah, so we are basically on the same timeline here, right? Both entering to year 3, having taken the tulip workshop around the same time. So before we get into the tulips piece of it, one thing that you mentioned was you have a bit of business background. Obviously, you and your mom run another kind of business, and that was something that really stood out to me about Brynhill Flower Farm, because you guys got your branding down, you hired a professional designer, and I just felt like you really approached starting a flower farm through the business lens and with business savvy. So let's actually reflect back on how year 2 was versus year 1. How was your year 2 overall in 2023?
Yeah, year 2 was great. We definitely, it's so funny when you start a business, year 1 flies by, and you just do so much work. And then year 2 rolls around and you're trying to remember all the stuff you did, and you look back at pictures and you're like, what do you mean I was XYZ, all this stuff? So year 2 was really nice because it was we already have the bed tilled up. We have the perennials planted. That was a really nice way to come into year 2. So if anyone who's just starting out is feeling oh my God, I'm never gonna, see the end of the madness. You do, I promise.
But there is more madness.
There is more madness. It just changes and you get used to it, right? So year 2, we did double our sales. And as Jesse mentioned, that we are primarily wholesale, and I'm talking 95% wholesale through my Cooperative. Working full time, I just can't, I couldn't conceptualize doing any retail. We'll get into that a little bit later, but bulk of our sales came from dahlias, the tulips that I forced, and then perennials and shrubs. We're very lucky to have a lot of big landscape beds here, particularly hellebores, which if you follow me, you know that I'm a big hellebore nut.
But you are effectively farming through all 4 seasons.
Yes, now I am, which has been interesting. This year I started forcing tulips the beginning of January, middle of January for CSA. So now I
But
really am.
your work happened way before then.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah.
not like
Yeah.
you started in January. You probably started in
Mhm.
like mid-November, if anything, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely with getting all the stuff in stock. And then we order in March, April. So all of like the mental planning and like, what are my numbers going to be? That happens as, we're still pulling tulips, right? But yeah, year 2 was great. It was definitely a slog. I'm figuring out now, because I'm doing 4 seasons of flower farming. I'm figuring out like something's got to give, and I know you've posted about that, is like figure out the logistics of like, okay, here we are, like what's the pattern? What are we going to do moving forward to like give ourselves a little more time, freedom. Personally, I'm looking to take like June and July off, if at all possible, and most of August. Labor Day was my biggest sales day. I don't know if I mentioned that to you before, but yeah, Labor Day.
Labor Day? I'm
Labor
shocked
Day.
to hear that. With
I know.
florists?
With sales to my florists and some pop-ups. People were having like doing DIY weddings that reached out to me, and not that many. I mean, like, it just takes a couple. And then I had my biggest week at my collective was Labor Day weekend.
At a certain point, you shared with me what you were doing, or in terms of your goal at the
Yeah.
collective weekly. Can
Mhm.
you share like high level the number you're trying to hit, and where were
Yeah.
you at year 1? Because that was great
Yes.
perspective for me.
But yeah, so my goal this year was to be around $300 a week. So I just ran the numbers and I did 30 weeks of sales at my collective, and I averaged $361 a week. I'm pretty happy with that. I was surprised. I was like, like you have these plans and then life happens and then you come back to it and you're like, oh, it worked out.
And I think sometimes it's hard for people who, one, haven't done flower farming for a while or at all, or haven't sold wholesale.
Mhm.
$360 worth of sales is effectively anywhere from like 25 to 30 bunches.
Yeah.
So it's a good amount of stem volume, and to do 30 weeks of it means that you've got to understand how to properly succession plan, to know what's going to come into bloom. And Haley, like, what was your first year? Because first year you obviously didn't do
Yeah.
360 a
Um,
week.
yeah. So my year 1 per week sales was about $150.
So you doubled,
So
you more than doubled.
more than doubled, which is just like, that was my goal, right? But to hear that and like, oh, you actually did that, is pretty great.
To double it,
Yes.
was it simply being like, okay, I need to grow more in volume? Were you more intentional about eliminating certain things and growing more of something else? Like, how did you get to that double? Because you didn't hire anyone to do it, right? And I think
No,
we're both still at the scale where there's still more juice left to squeeze.
yeah, definitely, definitely. For one, I did 400 dahlias. Year 1, I think I did 200 dahlias. And year 1, I put them in a washout area, so they were in standing water several times. So that's a losing battle, number 1. So they got moved to a prime position in my annual bed, and they were my highest sales. They were 25% of all my sales were dahlias, and then it was like 20% tulips, and then hellebores, celosia. I just have a great spot for growing celosia, honestly. And this is a good lesson that like, figure out what works and you can sell well and lean into that. My zinnias, I had a total crop failure in year 2. Year 1, they were phenomenal. I had beautiful Dawn Creeks. Everybody loved them. They were like my 4th sales thing. Total crop failure. So I scrapped those. For me, a lot of my motivation comes from annoyance at myself. I was annoyed that I put the dahlias in an area that got washed out, because my thoughts were, oh, it's closest to the existing garden, then I can water it. No, dummy, it's in the middle of the washout area. Like, there's just some things, and I've talked about this with growers in my collective, is like, it's great learning experience, but you have 365 days. You need to wait until you can redo that. And in some ways that's wonderful, and in other ways it's extremely frustrating. My hellebores just happened to have a better year in year 2, the tulips, and I forced that, there's such an expensive stem, they really just jack up, huge
Yeah.
prices.
So great transition into tulips because you said dahlias were about 25% of your
Mhm.
sales, tulips about 20%.
Mhm.
And so I would assume that that 20% is largely comprised of winter tulips.
Yes, they were winter and Easter tulip. When I did the tulip workshop, that was, I think, in like September, October. I had already placed all my orders for tulips. And so I was kind of in this weird spot where I'd bought tulips that were not suitable for forcing. So I ended up having to get 2 trays of 5Cs, and they were very expensive. I actually was just looking at this because I literally just ordered another crate of tulips an hour ago. Paid like what was it, $180 for a tray. The
Yep.
tulips that I bought in 20 whatever year that was, my first year, were $300.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. So the price breakdown,
That's about like 70 cents a bulb, maybe
yeah,
like
man.
60, yeah, high 60s. Yeah.
When I was looking back and I was like, why wasn't I profitable? It was because the tulips were like double the price cost.
Ugh, yeah.
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 No.
And I think that was a huge learning for me this year, but I'm
Mhm.
starting to get ahead of myself.
Mhm.
So okay, let's take a step back, right? So
Yes.
both of us forced tulips in both year one and year two. Let's talk about quantities.
Mhm.
So talk about how many you forced in this year and
Mhm.
like what that looked like, I guess, in terms of growth versus 2022,
Yeah.
year before.
The bulbs, I know we have to do like year one, year two because of like the timing and the.
Yep.
Okay, so in year one, I did 1,000 treated bulbs, which are winter tulips. We call them winter tulips or Valentine's Day, whatever you want to call them. And then I think I did like 1,000-ish untreated tulips, which untreated tulips, as some of you know, are the tulips that anyone can buy. They have no special treatment. The 5C tulips are special. Very few distributors. There's a whole science behind it. So I did 1,000, maybe I did 1,000 and 1,300 in year one. So like 2,300 tulips. And I only sold about a third of my 5Cs because it was very last minute that I bought these tulips. Not last minute, it was like November. And that was like my first year of wholesale growing. I had no retail people, zero, because I had really focused on my wholesale florist. And my florist knew me, and that was great. That was a good step, foot in the door. But my price per stem is $2, and that's a very expensive tulip. And that actually has not changed year to date, but that's a pretty hefty cost for a tulip, and for florists to take a risk on that. And they knew me a little bit, but they didn't know me at that point. So I sold about a third of what I had. And then I kind of picked up some retail sales, but I just kind of wrote it off as a learning year for the treated tulips in year one. Easter was a different story because at that point, people are a lot hungrier. If because they associate that March season or March April for tulips, so then those all sold out like no problem. And I had some really standout varieties. The tulips that I had for the first year Valentine's Day were like a purple and a pink, which that's wonderful, but 100 bunches of those, you're gonna have to work a little harder to get rid of them. And like my timing was off, so year one was basically a wash. I made very little profit, if any, quite honestly. I totally soil force. All of my crates are soil. I don't do any hydro, except this year I have started, thanks to Jesse. Yeah, right, exactly, literally.
You did 2,300 first year, which was a lot, I
Yeah,
feel.
it is a lot. It
Yes,
is a lot.
especially like even though it's stretched out over a couple of months for
Mhm.
soil, it's less stretched out because of the time it takes. And so therefore most of your stems I assume are coming in like later January through March.
Yeah, well, and then I like messed up and my 2 varieties bloomed in 14 days of bringing them into my house, where the
Mm,
guidance typically is like three and a
3
half,
weeks.
four
Yep.
weeks. Yeah, so that's fun and a good lesson for anyone who's doing tulips, that like you just got to do it, because like you can read about it until you experience stuff in your own environment. Good luck.
Yes.
Godspeed to you.
This year then, what did
Yes.
it look like for you?
Yeah, so this year I did 1,700 treated tulips. So for winter tulips, I was very fortunate. I split my tulip supply with a friend, and I was able to get a lot more varieties. I had the experience from year one to know like what people want, and like, oh, hey, maybe you should have a red for Valentine's Day. wild concept. I was able to really kind of tailor, and I'm an aesthetics person. Like I like make sure everything coordinates and it looks good, and like I'm obnoxious. So I really spent a lot of time, curating my tulips this year. So I did 1,700 total treated, and they're all in soil. And so I'm like in October, November, exhausted, like planting tulips and like how crates, and it's a nightmare. I ended up selling about 900 to my florist, which is just like outstanding. That was almost triple. That is triple of what I sold in year one.
Can we pause there? Like, what changed? Was it because they got to know you, or like you did more
Yeah.
marketing?
I think I pride myself on constantly talking about things I'm passionate about. It's just my personality. And I spent some time, making things in little previews in Canva with other people's pictures and emailing my florist and just talking one-on-one to them. I do make a point when I'm at my collective and I'm there for a time period, go up and talk to my florist. Having a face to a name and personality, it really means so much.
So you built relationships.
So I built
You
relationships, number one.
inadvertently marketed,
I inadvert,
right? Like
yes. Yeah.
pretty much very consistently,
Yeah,
right?
very consistently, just talking about the dang things, keeping it front of mind for people. And then the people who saw the forest tulips in year one, be it the Valentine's Day or the Easter, they just were so blown away by the quality. If you aren't familiar, florists get tulips that are like this big. They're tight as can be. They'll stay tight as can be because they're shipped from Holland or Canada. They're harvested very young, so they don't get the same development as the ones that you see here. And so there's just like no comparison. Like I really mean that. Like, and it's
Like,
not an exaggeration. Like, but I mean, gorgeous.
I mean,
Oh
this
yeah,
thing, like, let me give you my hand.
yes,
I
yeah.
often see on Facebook people commenting about how forced tulips don't open as big. And for certain varieties, it is true. You're going to get a better field result or soil result, or like non-forced result, sorry.
Yeah.
Um, but for the most part, everything that I force is so big that they end up drooping, right?
Yes. Yeah, like this one, this is crazy. It's so big.
Yeah.
It's so big. And so actually, Jesse,
The double
this
shake?
variety. Yeah. This variety is the one that you have.
Yes, that's Louvre. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Or
wait,
not
no, it's
Louvre,
not. I lied.
Lambada. Yeah.
Yeah, lambada. Yeah. So you
Yeah.
can see, like, I just picked this today.
Yes.
It will
And it
become,
will turn into this, or at least this at the, yeah.
yeah, that.
Yeah.
And like, and that evolution you do not get from commodity tulips. Like, you just don't. My florists appreciate the organic nature, shall we say, and the art of the tulips, as I talk about in all my stuff. That just the quality really speaks for itself. And that's something that if I would be doing this all over again, I would be getting my tulips in their hands as soon as humanly possible. They might gawk at the price. I know that's often in the Facebook groups and the commentaries that, the florists gawk at the price. And like, yeah, they're expensive. Like we've talked about, they're $2 a stem. Tulips commodity can literally be anywhere from like $6 for 15. That's just a hard number to break, but they're not going to look like that.
Yeah, and I had sent to you the podcast with Ellen Frost and Jenny Love, and I thought that was a really good conversation because they talked about winter tulips and they talked about this phenomenon of more people starting to force because of the tulip workshop, but then seeing the prices, they said it was like 235 to 250 that they were seeing in Ellen's region. And Jenny made this good point, which is that when you're a smaller scale grower, there's only so much economies of scale that you can have. So in order for it to be profitable, it does have to be above that $2 price point. And
Right.
Ellen chimed in with her florist background saying, well, the florist needs to mark up by 3 times in order to, that 1/3 is to make a profit, 1/3 is to pay the farmer, 1/3 is to pay for the overhead. So based on your experience, Haley, with your florists, was there a lot of pushback once they understood the quality of the stems? And did you hear a lot of balking about the pricing?
No, I have one florist who asked if like I would give a bulk discount because I think I did last year because I was like kind of desperate to move them. And I just said, no, I'm not forcing enough to offer a bulk price. And they're understanding. Here's the thing: there's always going to be people who want something cheaper. Like that's just how it goes, right? Like there's always going to be someone who asks for cheaper price, and that's my one florist, and that's fine. That's fine. She can ask, and I can say no or yes. I am very fortunate, and I really don't know if it's honestly my personality that I like. That people don't really question that or. People, and oftentimes, like I've sent people availabilities, people that do pop-ups or, some smaller home florists, and they just don't respond, or they don't order. And, they never say to me like, oh, it's too expensive. Maybe that is it. Maybe they missed the order window because I did sell out. I had been really pushing like pre-orders because I wanted to be done. I'm very open about like, here I am in, at Christmas or whatever, negative temps, going to check my cooler. Got to go water my tulips. Like, I do really think that behind the scenes helps. It's just part of education, right? With the whole tulips, they're great. And in flower farming in general, it's great. I love it. There are about 50,000 other things I could be doing with my time. So, I need to price them in such a way that it's worth my time to be doing this.
Yes.
Passion takes you so far, but like you need to be paid for what you're doing.
Yes. And that's something we'll talk about later in terms of what does that mean for next year.
Mm-hmm.
I want to stay on this topic around just you selling during Valentine's Day because I feel like you had a system this year where you were like, I am going to start my pre-orders at this date. Like I have a more just organized way of pushing them. So what changed between year one and year two from the when?
Going into year one, I really had no idea what the heck I was doing. So it's just kind of like, here, I have these tulips. Like, I think I probably started advertising middle of January. And I didn't have anything to show for it, right? Like, that's another challenge is like when you're starting out to do something, it's like you don't have any pictures and like people buy with their eyes, like they need to see, like, there's one thing if it's a number on a piece of paper, like, but something as expensive as these tulips, like, you need to see them. You need to know like what you're getting into. What I did this year is I used Canva and I made like a little pre-order form. I had some pictures. I did borrow them off the internet, gave credit, wasn't posting them anywhere. Just sent them in an email to my florist. And I had put out like a couple times on my Instagram stories, which by the way, I only do Instagram and have a website. Like I don't do any Facebook or anything. I have some emails from last time, over the year. And then I was asking for people's emails. And then I sent an email. I think my first email was like the beginning of January. I sent them, I like laid it all out. Like here are my delivery days. Here's like the order form with the pictures and the costs. And as I said, all my stems are $2 for Valentine's Day. So
that's actually a really good point because I think a lot of newer growers don't realize florists who have been doing this for a while put their pre-orders in for the major holidays weeks in advance.
Oh yeah.
So I had a designer that was like, are you going to have Columbus in the beginning of January? They're like, we're sourcing our stems. So if Valentine's Day is February 14th every single year, if you're starting to market on the 1st of February, you are too late. I would say that the latest you should start marketing is mid-January.
Yeah, like right? the latest.
Exactly.
And you better have been like talking about it, like like casually. Like you ever be talking to people and be like, hey, remember tulips? And that was the thing too, is like I wanted to give people adequate time between like the holidays, like Christmas and New Year's. I sent my first email on like the Wednesday the 10th. With all of the information, just really spelled it out. I had a flat rate delivery and like a 4-bunch minimum because typically my florist I'm finding are like 5 to 6 bunch average for an order because they're adding my tulips into other things.
Exactly.
Because they are, a high cost item. There's not many people that are like making a totally, a tulip heavy bouquet, right? So they're getting added in. And the other thing too, they can brag about how they have local tulips. And that's another selling point right there.
That's what I'm finding, where it's obviously too expensive to make an entire bouquet fully tulips. And honestly, like the end consumer is probably also going to be like, why is this entire thing tulips, right? Like they're not going to understand, well, it's all local.
Like I can go to Whole Foods and buy like Trader Joe's and like get a tulip bunch.
Exactly. Like I'm seeing a lot of more, we'll call it beginner, newer types of florists who
Hmm.
really are prioritizing local. They're the ones who are actually buying a lot more in quantity from me at once.
Definitely.
I see the
Definitely.
ones who have had a few years under their belts understand, hey, in order for me to make Valentine's Day profitable, I
Hmm.
can source all American, right, with the foliage and other stuff, but I'm only going to be able to dedicate like 20% of my budget to the premium focals, which would be tulips here.
Right.
So it was just really interesting for me to see how different florists approach the budget.
Mhm.
And I could totally tell when someone was completely new because
Yeah,
like
I know. Bless them.
I have a lot more bunches, right, than what
Yeah.
I would normally see. And look,
Yeah.
it's obviously fantastic that they want to support.
Hmm.
I just think that they're probably in the process of still crunching or figuring out
For
what
sure.
that profitability piece looks like.
Yeah.
So I would say that in comparison to Haley, who really worked her butt off to pre-sell bunches, like how many did you end up pre-selling at the end?
90,
Yeah,
90. Uh,
90 bunches.
yeah, and 90 bunches, so like
90
900 something.
bunches.
Yeah. For 2, 3 days. I did a Friday, Sunday, and Monday delivery.
Yeah,
Uh,
so that's 900 stems that she pre-sold. In comparison, I sold under 2 dozen
okay, yeah.
pre-committed. And a part of it was just, even though it's in my second year, I could not still fully grasp what was going to come in and what wasn't. And it was less about what was going to come in too early and
Mhm.
more just what was on the fence. So there
Yeah.
was like one particular variety that everyone had the same experience, and it's called Carnival de Nice, which is
Yeah.
this one. Really, really pretty, but literally the slowest growing tulip.
Is
So
it a leaf?
she just bloomed for me, and it should have been a week before Valentine's Day.
I'm like, what day? I feel like Valentine's Day was a month ago. I'm like, what day is it?
It's
Wow.
only like it's only what, like 10, nine
Yeah.
days.
9 days. Feels
Nine
like.
days. Oh my God, it feels like it was, yeah, because the
Mhm.
stress of Valentine's Day is
No.
obscene. Yeah.
It's nuts. But that actually leads into another great point about the local tulips is that I was finding, and when I was dropping off, because I do all of my own deliveries, and it's a nice time to get some FaceTime with my florist and just chat. So many of them were missing orders. Their tulips were delivered, but not to them. No idea where they went. I didn't even have enough to offer them any because I sold out. So I was like, oh boy, got to fix this next year.
So
Um,
but that's the thing. Like even florists can be last minute. So even though
oh yeah.
I only sold under 2 dozen
Hmm.
by, we'll call it the end of January, the week leading up to Valentine's Day, I
Yeah.
started getting random like day
Oh
of
yeah.
orders, like please
Yeah.
ship out today.
Yeah.
And so I had, I would say, cleared about like 80% of all of my stems
Wow.
uh like the few days leading up before Valentine's Day, because I also had a work trip during the Monday, Tuesday, right? Which was fine because no florist is going to want to have the stems so close
Yeah.
because they need a condition, they need to arrange with them and all that stuff. But I would say that I sold out of every single stem that I had because I still had demand the weekend after. And that's another learning, which
Mhm.
is that, first of all, not everyone has a Valentine. So it's not like Mother's Day where everyone has a mother or a motherly figure,
True.
right? But not everyone's going to have someone who's going to buy flowers for them. And
Mhm.
so I find that people still want flowers outside of Valentine's Day.
That's a good point. That's a good point, and something that I need to account for next year.
So I sat probably for about 5 days without any stems. And luckily, there wasn't a ton of demand, but I had to turn some retail customers away and be like, sorry, I have nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Me right now, I just sent my last one of my last subscriber tulips, and like I usually I sell her some for the shop. I have none because I was like too in my head with Valentine's Day. I didn't plan accordingly.
So, do you feel like you can still increase your production around Valentine's Day, or did you feel like you hit your limit?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So as I mentioned that I'm doing hydroforcing for the first time. The fringe tulips you see behind me are hydroforced. Woohoo! Jesse, all to Jesse, all credit to Jesse. She convinced my mom, who my mom is like, buy the book, Miss Sanitation, sanitation's everything. Like no.
So the most hilarious part, Haley, is that Eric always jokes that I'm like not a very clean sanitation oriented person. I'm like, just put some Xeritol on there, like a little disinfect it.
Some
And then
Windex.
whenever he makes fun of me, I'm like, I own a soap company. And he's like, uh-huh. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like, that's the last product you should be selling.
No, it's
So
the third product.
it's just funny because I feel like that's a testament around just if I can do hydro,
Yeah.
anyone can do hydro.
There you go. There you go.
Yes.
And part of the conversation is the risk factor, which we'll get
Yes.
to. But yeah, you gotta be pretty risk.
Yeah. But
Uh,
so does having some success with hydro, because clearly
yeah.
you've got some stems, does that
Mhm.
impact your numbers next year for
Definitely,
Valentine's Day?
definitely. I'm going to do all of my CSAs as hydro, and then I'm going to keep some soil forest for my florist. I have the infrastructure set up, and I just am seeing that the tulips I soil force I really can nail down when they're going to be ready. There's just some difference in soil in hydroforcing the soil that I don't think I'm willing to take the risk necessarily to do all of my florist tulips in hydro.
You mentioned CSA, and I realized we didn't talk about you
Yes, yeah, yeah.
expanding to retail.
Big shock. Yeah. So, okay. So back to this. So I did 1,700 treated tulips this year. 900 of those went to my florist, 950-ish went to the florist. And then the rest went to my CSA, which is very exciting. So
That's awesome.
we had 12 subscribers total. And the way I did it is actually similar to Jesse. Thank you again for your assistance. But I had 2 pickup locations. And they went every other. So I did 3 bouquets over 6 weeks. And so the first was at the jewelry store, the next was at a bookstore, and then jewelry store, bookstore, bookstore. That was great. I was very fortunate. My good friend owns the jewelry store, friend that I've made like through the collective, and another friend who's a grower, and she and I have collaborated a bit. She's just awesome. Like, she's just a big flower person. So she's like the perfect candidate for having a pickup. And the other pickup is at a bookstore in a neighborhood that's right in the heart of the city. It's called the Central North Side Mexican War Streets in Pittsburgh, for anyone who knows. It's the City of Asylum bookstore. They have a really cool mission. They support exiled writers who are seeking asylum in America, being persecuted by their governments. And so that is the neighborhood my dad lives in. And I have known the people who operate this business, or who founded the organization. I've known them basically almost my entire life. So I kind of use that connection to get me a shoe-in to be able to do this. And then because my dad lives in that neighborhood and I know all these people, a whole bunch of people bought subscriptions from me. That was great.
Would you say you got any subscribers who didn't know about you before?
Yeah, definitely. So what I ended up doing, I made 2 posts, a post for each location. I posted in my stories on Instagram with a link. And then I actually made a print ad for them to hang up in store. And I can't tell exactly the leads, but I'm willing to bet that a good chunk of them came from that ad.
Wow.
And I used like a pretty splashy picture. I used one of my tulips sitting in my driveway with snow in the background. So it's like, it's like, whoa, winter tulips, like
Magical.
magic.
Yes.
It's snowing, but she's got flowers.
It's year one. I mean, 12 shares is honestly plenty.
Mhm.
And it's a really good way to get your feet wet. And my
Definitely.
question for you then is, do you have plans to expand that next year?
Definitely. I'm hoping to do 30 shares a week.
Woo! There is just a really important role that retail plays when it comes to winter tulips. In a way, for
Yeah.
me personally, my belief that like it just has more of an impact
Yeah.
versus other seasons. So first, if you're selling predominantly wholesale and you're
Mhm.
selling to designers, there's not a lot of events going on in the
Yeah.
winter, right? So you're really trying to hit Valentine's Day for those
Mhm.
florists, and outside of Valentine's Day might be these one-off workshops that they might have, an event here or there, but
Shoots.
it's so different than during spring and
Yeah.
fall, right? But then there's this other piece which has become a bigger conversation, especially amongst tulip workshop participants, which is just the state of the reality of both climate change and what happens when certain varieties get overloved. And when varieties get overloved, there is a higher demand, which means that more farmers are putting all their eggs in that basket trying to produce that. You get climate change, where in 2023 it was a terrible harvest,
Yeah.
compounded with a terrible fall for planting. It was like too wet.
Yeah.
So in 2024, we're all expecting to also see some bulb shortages. And then once you start having bulb shortages, it's like what's happened in the livestock industry. The bulbs need to regenerate. So you have a smaller number of bulbs
Mhm.
to regenerate from, which is going to create more of a pinch on demand in the years
Yeah.
going forward. So I point this out because when you sell to designers, you don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of the colors, even the styles in terms of what they want. But when you sell retail, especially for CSA, I can take any kind of substitute.
Yeah. And Jesse, you make up a really good point, and that's something that we have seen in the nursery industry for years and years and years. We, during what was the last economic, like in 2013, no one was planting anything. So in the tree nursery industry, deciduous nursery business, there's a huge lag time. So when you don't plant for a full year or two because the economy is down, it takes 5 to 6 years for that slump to catch up in the supply chain, and you're SOL. Like, there are no trees at 3 to 4 inch caliper, and I'm getting really in the nitty gritty because this is my world that I've lived in, right? But there becomes this pressure point, pinch point, where it's just not available. And our architects and the owners of the businesses, we work a lot for universities, two big universities in Pittsburgh. They don't want to hear that we don't have 3 inch caliper trees available. That doesn't mean anything to them. So it becomes very challenging with these kind of overlove situations, or, climate change, economic situations, which is a lot in the nursery industry.
Yeah,
As a
people
supplier.
don't think about how, like, we have a housing shortage in the US, and that's why housing prices are so high because we underbuilt during the last recession. But
Right.
it's very similar in certain cases in the flower farming world. And it's not something I thought about until tulip forcing because it was really brought to front of mind,
Mhm.
especially since tulips are one of our main crops, right? So I
Yeah.
think that when you grow enough of something in excess of like 10,000, these things start mattering and you start really strategically thinking about what are the sales outlets and
Yeah.
levers I can pull to mitigate some of these impacts, because when we say no to a substitute, that obviously has a ripple effect on the grower who is growing those bulbs. If enough people say no, then do they get to sell those bulbs? And I'm sure eventually they'll find an end consumer, but the less time you're spending trying to sell something, the more time you can dedicate on growing
Doing
the
something
crop,
well.
right? Yeah, exactly. So it's just
Do
one
your
of those
job.
things where we have a lot more impact and influence than we think, but it
Definitely.
all starts with you being strategic about how you're going to sell it. Because if I'm 100% wholesale, I can't take every single sub.
No,
Yeah.
and we talked about this is because I spent a lot of time like figuring out my substitutions and like what I was willing to accept, as I at that time was thinking wholesale, wholesale, wholesale. I need to make sure that I can't sell yellow margarita, 500 of those, to the big bright yellows, to my florist. I can maybe sell like 10 bunches of those, but not
Yeah.
50.
Not a full crate's worth. And I laugh because I have certain designers who always respond back to me and they're like, I can't wrap my head around this. Yellow was your most popular color at the bouquet bar. Like, what? So it's
And
just
that,
funny. Yeah.
yeah, to be a healthy and viable, you need to be able to think about those different places you can sell things. Actually, a lot of my stems ended up going to a pop-up. I was pleasantly surprised. That kind of came last minute because I was like, what am I going to do with these extras? Like,
Oh,
and they
yeah.
just kind of snapped them up for me, which is wonderful.
I do want to talk about our plans for next year because
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
started getting really into the numbers and
Yeah,
data,
I did.
right?
I did.
Because I think after year two, you
Mhm.
start getting comfortable, you start understanding what is possible, what isn't in terms of your capacity.
Yeah.
And then the ultimate question becomes, how much do I need to do to make it worth my time? And that was how I approached it.
Yeah.
So Haley, do you want to go first in terms of what your plans
Sure.
for year three look like?
So I am still kind of figuring out the numbers. But Valentine's Day, my goal I think is going to be to have 2,000 stems to offer. And I think that's really where I'm going to top out. 1,000 was doable. Was I exhausted and delirious?
Yes.
Absolutely. I think I can squeak out another couple, double what I have. So like 2,000 there. And then I need to do the math. If I'm going to do 12 weeks of 30, whatever that math works out to be.
360. Right.
360. Okay. Yeah. So it's like 5,000. And I'm thinking between 5,000 and 7,000. I would like to have some more tulips available to people. I currently just am growing what I have sold, basically. I'd like to get a point where I have a couple, some more bunches to offer. My one florist who is all US grown, I think she's going to probably start doing more year-round stuff. Right now she's event only, but I think she's probably going to get more into. But anyway, I digress. So long story short, I'd like to have more. I'm kind of thinking I'm going to do about 7,000.
Yeah, and I would say that when I think about scaling up, it really is around like outside of Valentine's Day because
Yeah.
I really felt like I intended to do about 2,000. I had a couple of trays that were later, right? The ones that are just blooming right now. But that was just, I mean, look, maybe if I didn't have that work trip, it would have been a little bit different,
Yeah.
but it was a hustle. I mean,
Yeah.
it was stressful and I feel like it was way easier than what florists have to deal with. But that felt like that was my max. And if anything, I want to push a little bit earlier. So I
Yes.
started offering my first CSA during the last week of December. I got stems. My first stem came in on December 10th this year. And I didn't have a ton, but I would say I started having a ton probably about 10 days after that, so December 20th. So I probably
Wow.
could pull up the CSA a little bit earlier.
Okay.
And holiday tulips actually
That's
sell well, right?
that is
You have the
what.
right colors. You can
Yep.
pair them with lilies even or paper whites, whatever you
And
have that's
that's
white.
my plan.
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot more opportunity, and if you can pull up the
Yeah.
schedule, there's risk in that because you might
Mhm.
get shorter stems, but there's also less risk of attrition. So I'm still trying to play around with the numbers, but I crunched my numbers for 2023 at about, we'll call it 7,000. It might actually be a little bit less now because I'm starting to see higher attrition in
Mm,
my current sessions with hydro, but
yeah.
let's just say it's 7,000. And so I'm baking in a 20% attrition. So I
Okay.
would say up until now, I've had on average 15% attrition. And
Okay.
so I'm upping that to 20% to account for this month. So that
Hmm.
brings me to losing 1,400 stems,
Wow.
which is a lot if you think about it, right? That's like
It's 2 full trays. Three.
$2,800.
Well, and that's 3 full trays, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So that means I get to sellable stems of about 5,600.
Okay.
And at what I'm selling it at between retail and wholesale, I'm looking at a profit margin of about $1.10. And that,
Fabulous.
like when I do the average on Excel right now, it's $1.30, but I'm inconsistent with calculating credit card fees. There's the utilities piece of it with the lighting that I haven't put in, right? Like I think
Mhm.
I count in rubber bands and paper, like the
Yeah.
small stuff with that. But there's other stuff that I haven't counted for. So I'm putting in 20 cents a stem to be conservative. So
Mhm.
that's $1.10 per stem. And what that gets me to for the 2023 season is about a $6,160 profit.
Wow.
So, but
Oh.
one thing to think about is that profit is spread over a few months. We
Mhm.
start basically in November. I mean, I got my bulbs in early November. So you got November, December, January, February, March.
March.
So you got 5 months. And so
Yeah.
your total profit per month comes out to about $1,200 a month, which look, is nothing to sneeze at,
Yeah, sure.
but it is also a lot of effort for $1,200 a month.
That is what it always comes back to.
Yes.
I was running my numbers and my profit for Valentine's Day, slash my CSAs, but we're just going to say Valentine's Day was $1,400. Um,
Which is
so
not
again,
bad for like
not
a
bad.
1 day holiday. Like that's your profit. That's not your revenue. That's your
Yeah,
profit,
that's
right?
profit. Yeah.
So that's not bad at all for a 1 day holiday, but it was also probably very stressful and you needed to recover from it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. The profit is great. We love to see it. It's very profitable, but like at what cost? And it again
Exactly.
comes back to I can be doing so many other things with my time. The way it works out for me is that it's the down season at the landscape company. I have some more free time and more brain space. And that's, to me, what it boils down to is like the mental load of it is a lot. I'm very, very prone to burnout. I need a lot of rest. Like I need to be resting a good solid hour, hour and a half, 2 hours in the evening, like, which is a lot. Not everyone can do that, and not everybody has the ability to do that. But like for me to be able to continue to do this,
I hear you because I don't have a life. I
I
mean,
know,
like
Jesse, it's like
once a month, maybe we have friends over, we go over. But yeah, like I don't have nearly the same social life as my peers. I mean, that being said, I also have a kid, so most people don't have lives when they have a kid. But there is a huge opportunity cost to winter
yes,
tulips, and it all comes down to what number makes sense for you. And that's obviously
yeah,
going to look different for everyone. Because I always get this question around how many tulips should I be doing if I want to take the tulip workshop? And it's like financially, you need to be forcing, in my view, at least 3,000, like
at
a couple
least,
thousand, right?
at least.
Minimum to break even, to get what you need out of it. But then after you break even and after that first year of learnings, then it's about you, right?
Yeah,
It's about what makes sense for you. Look, some people might be happy with like $500 a month, right?
yeah, yeah.
And like there is obviously more effort in terms of a $500 profit per month versus 2,000 per month. But at a certain point, there is economies of scale. There's still that juice left to squeeze before you need that second person. And for me, there is still that juice to squeeze. And when I look at it, I'm like, I want $2,000 in profit a month.
Yeah,
So then
definitely.
when you work backwards, for me, that looks like 11,500 bulbs for the entire winter season, which feels doable because that's about a 60%, 65% increase. That's not like doubling what I did
Right.
this year. I think it's not only doable, but it also forces me to think more strategically about how I could be efficient. So
Yeah,
maybe that
definitely.
is more CSA shares, but maybe that is also working with like a local farm with their CSA, or we have a place where we buy meat that is open 4 seasons and maybe they want to carry winter tulips for Valentine's Day, right? So forces you to be more efficient about your sales outlets.
We talked about this the last time. Is like we want to be growing when people are hungry for tulips or hungry for flowers.
Yes.
I don't want to like I want people hungry and coming to me. I don't want to have to be like schlepping around begging people to buy flowers.
100%. I mean,
June,
it's
July,
such
August.
a different it's almost flipped around, right? And look, it's not that it's easy to sell tulips because, as
Yeah.
you heard, for year one, Haley actually couldn't sell two-thirds of
Uh-uh.
her scents, even though she was
No.
focusing on wholesale. But the point is that I feel like during most of the year where other people are growing,
Mhm.
you got the growing part figured out, and then it's really about the selling. During the winter, you got to figure out the growing part, but once you figure that out, the selling part is a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And got that little bit of a learning curve. And then once you get to that, and my the learning curve for me in year one was I didn't have any retail customers. And had I had retail customers or any kind of retail base, I would have sold those 2/3 of my 1,000 tulips that I had at Valentine's Day or January, February.
Yeah.
So that was on me for not planning better and thinking, and hoping, a wish and a prayer that like my florists are going to come through for me, which they did, right? Like, I mean, selling 36 bunches with zero experience and zero background.
The reality of it is there's so few other people selling tulips. Like people get concerned about, oh, there's so many more winter tulip forcers. And yes, there are, but I
Where
don't
are
see
they?
anyone popping down the street from me type of
Yeah.
type of saturation yet. So
Let me tell you, I know 4 people. Someone who I share bulbs with is 45 minutes north of me in her very rural farm community. She sells at her mom's archery shop.
oh, her,
Yeah,
yes.
Justine. Yep, Justine. Shout
Yes.
out to Justine. She posted in the group about that. Those people, it's fabulous. For her, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, like those
Yeah.
guys. We joke about that. So we got Justine up north of me. We have Becca at 11 Mile Farm, who is a very established retail CSA grower. She's in a pretty wealthy part of Pittsburgh, outside of the city, but she has her garden club kind of people, that kind of vibe. That are very loyal to her, and she forces. She's also part of my collective, and she did sell some forced tulips. But she and I, Justine, she and I are in good communication about pricing. And so, there's a lot of camaraderie in that, which is fabulous. And I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
That's really nice. There is another flower farm that just started forcing this year. They offered $2 a stem retail. They're a very established farm. They do sales at their farm and then through a grocery delivery company. So they have a very specific niche. I'm very fortunate. My florists are locked in with me. I deliver to their door. They know they can call on me.
Yeah, everyone has a different value proposition that they offer is the point, right?
We have our avenues. Was it a little annoying that they were so cheap in their tulips? Sure. I'll get over it. Our customers are not the same.
Yes, that's the key. And I have someone who in my co-op is potentially thinking about taking the tulip workshop. And I am excited because I'm like, yes, if you do it and I do it and you have a hoop house that you can do other stuff, right? Like we can coordinate on varieties and we can provide a bigger selection and keep the co-op open potentially for a longer duration, because it's not enough for me to be like, here's my piddly extra like 200 bunches and right, like it's just not enough variety. So the more people you have, especially in a collective or co-op model, the better.
There's a huge potential. And, I had mentioned a little bit before that Justine and I split our ball border in half. So I had seven varieties, and I think I've got 9 varieties for Easter. That's just what, in year 1, I had 2 varieties for Valentine's Day. That there's so much value in that. And Justine and I, there's been times where she wasn't sure if her stuff was going to be ready, and I wasn't sure. We were going to trade trays. Like, be like, okay, here we go. Like, we're going to trade trays. And like,
it's insurance, right?
It's insurance. It's like, thank God I'm not the only person out here doing this.
Yes.
She jumped in doing the same quantity I'm doing year 2. She's doing in year 1 with just her retail people. And, she got some subscribers. I think we both had about 12 subscribers. We did about like 4,000 tulips. She got, so that's pretty impressive. Like,
that's awesome.
Big ups to her for like jumping like head in and like going for it, because I'm not that kind of risk taker. I'm a little bit risk adverse, let's say. And I only did 1,000 untreated or treateds, and she did double that. Going back, figuring out that sweet spot, right, of like what's gonna work for me. Still figuring that out, but I'm gonna be more in line with where you are right now, probably about 6,000, I think.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much for catching up. Where can people find you on social media and all that good stuff?
On social media, we are Brynhill Flower Farm. I'm rocking my logo. By the way, our logo was done by the homegrown studio, Alessandra, who is awesome. And this whole logo thing was our first big investment as a business. So like, if you think that like you're a little nuts, like just know that we spent a lot of money on branding before we even had the business started.
But it's important.
It's important, and it helped us take ourselves seriously. I'm getting off track. But so we are at Brynhill Flower Farm on Instagram, and we have a website. I am not on Facebook. I'm rebelling against Facebook. I'm just there to creep on the Facebook groups of the groups. The groups. But yeah, so you guys can find us there. I do love a chat in the DMs. If I like ignore you, just remessage me. I'm always on my phone. But yeah, anyway, it was so wonderful to catch up with you, and thank you all for joining in and listening to the rambling, and I hope it was useful. I had people tell me when I posted about doing this video with you, a couple people had reached out just saying like, thank you so much for your first video. It really inspired me. So that felt really nice. And so we love to hear it. So yeah, thank you so much, Jessie.
No, thank you so much, Haley.